She mocked an old man in a wheelchair at the bank, not realizing he silently owned the whole place. Less than an hour later, she was fired. The automatic doors of Guardian State Bank's West Haven branch slid open at 9:03 a.m. Morning sunlight streamed across the freshly cleaned floors as 63-year-old Elliot Dandridge wheeled inside. He wore a faded grey jacket, a beat-up baseball cap pulled low, and a calm, unreadable expression. Nothing about him screamed important, and that was the point. Elliot slowly rolled through the lobby before stopping at the front desk. The bank had just opened, and employees were still sipping coffee and straightening their name tags. A few customers sat in the waiting area, eyes glued to their phones. The air smelled faintly of printer ink and lemon cleaner. "Excuse me," Elliot said politely. "Could I speak with the branch manager?" Behind the counter, Megan Alcott, a platinum blonde in her 30s with heavy mascara and a sharp bob, glanced up. She didn't smile. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, barely looking at him. "No," Elliot replied, "but I'd appreciate—" She cut him off with a raised hand, then turned to a co-worker and muttered just loud enough to hear, "Betty's here to cash someone else's check or complain about something we can't fix." She hadn't shouted, but she didn't need to. A few heads turned in the waiting area. A teenage boy shifted uncomfortably. His mother frowned, unsure if she'd heard right. Elliot paused, blinked slowly, and tilted his head, not in shock, but calculation. He hadn't expected perfection, but this was worse than usual. "I can wait," he said, calmly. "But I'd still like to speak with the manager." Megan sighed like he'd asked her to scrub the floors. "Sir, unless you're a client, the manager doesn't have time for walk-ins." "I'm not here to withdraw money," Elliot said. "Then what are you here for?" Megan snapped, her voice rising. "Is there a problem?" A new voice cut in. Eduardo, a Latino man in his late 40s, with a client services badge. He stood stiffly, lips pressed tight. Megan didn't look at him. "I've got this, Eduardo." Eduardo didn't back down. "Miss Alcott, lower your tone." "I said I've got it," she hissed. Elliot met Eduardo's eyes for a brief second, nodding in silent thanks. Then, with the patience of a man used to teaching people how to treat him, he turned back to Megan. "Just the manager, that's all I'm asking." Megan rolled her eyes, grabbed a clipboard, and slapped it on the counter. "Fine. Write your name. Maybe someone will see you in an hour." But Elliot didn't touch it. Instead, he calmly opened a leather folder on his lap. The mother and son in the waiting area exchanged glances. The room tensed. Megan leaned against the counter, pretending not to notice, as Elliot unfolded a document. She muttered to Eduardo, "Some people think demanding attention gets them somewhere." Eduardo stayed silent, arms crossed, watching. Elliot wasn't rushed. If anything, he looked like a man who'd seen this too many times to be surprised. He slid a tri-folded paper onto the counter and tapped it once. "Please give this to your manager." Megan scoffed. "We don't take unsolicited paperwork. If this is a complaint, we have an online—" "It's not a complaint," Elliot said, evenly. "I already told you," she snapped, louder now. "Unless you're depositing money or seeing a banker, you'll wait like everyone else." A murmur spread through the lobby. A woman in scrubs whispered to the man beside her, "She's talking to him like he's a child." People were noticing. Megan, still oblivious, pushed the paper aside with a manicured nail and gave Elliot a fake smile. "If you won't sign in, I'll have to ask you to move." Elliot leaned back slightly, not retreating, just observing. Then he turned to Eduardo. "Would you mind handling this?" Eduardo stepped forward without hesitation. Megan immediately tried to stop Eduardo. He doesn't need... But Eduardo held up a hand, not to Elliot, but to her, a quiet, firm warning. He picked up the document, scanned it quickly, and his eyes widened. This is from corporate," he said. Megan frowned. "What?" Eduardo didn't answer right away. He took a step back, rereading the bottom of the page. "You should get Brian, now." Megan hesitated. "For him? He's with a clique." "Now," Eduardo repeated, voice firm. She blinked. He didn't say another word, but the look on his face said everything. With an annoyed sigh, Megan grabbed the office phone and pressed 2 buttons. She turned her back to the lobby, speaking low into the receiver. Elliot didn't watch her. Instead, he studied the room. Clients weren't pretending to ignore the scene anymore. Some were openly staring. An older man in a flannel jacket gave him a small nod. A woman clutched her purse tighter, but didn't look away. In the corner, the teenager had pulled out his phone, not to record, just to text, but his eyes stayed fixed on Elliot. Megan hung up. "He'll be out when he can," she muttered, stepping away like she wanted nothing to do with this mess. Elliot glanced at Eduardo. "Thank you." Eduardo nodded slightly. "We don't get many visits from corporate. I didn't recognize you, sir." "That's the idea," Elliot replied. Now Megan heard him, really heard him, for the first time. "Corporate," she repeated, her voice flatter, cautious. "You work for Guardian State?" Elliot didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to the lobby, resting his hands lightly on his wheelchair. He was still calm, but there was something in the way he looked at the floor, like he was waiting for everything to click into place. Megan hadn't figured it out yet. And her biggest mistake was thinking she still controlled the room. She paced behind the counter, arms crossed, nails tapping against her sleeve. Her earlier smugness had turned brittle. You could hear it in her silence. But she still hadn't apologized, still hadn't asked for an explanation. She was waiting, hoping whatever this man claimed could be brushed aside. Across the lobby, Terence Holland, one of the youngest tellers, paused mid-transaction. The air felt heavier than it should. He excused himself from his client, an elderly woman depositing her retirement check, and walked back to his station. Leaning against the glass partition, he watched Elliot. He'd seen everything. The way Megan had spoken to the man, the way she'd dismissed Eduardo, the most respectful guy on staff. Terence reached into his pocket and opened his camera app. He hesitated, then quietly hit record. The teenager whispered to his mum, "Is he like some kind of undercover boss?" She glanced at Elliot, then at Megan, then back at her son. "He doesn't need to be undercover. Look how quiet she got all of a sudden." They weren't wrong. Megan wasn't talking anymore. She kept staring down the hallway, praying for someone, anyone, to step out and fix this. She shot Eduardo a glare, but he'd already returned to his desk, typing something deliberately, ignoring her. The front doors opened again. A middle-aged woman in a sharp suit walked in, paused, and scanned the room like she'd stepped into a storm. She froze when she saw Elliot, then seemed to decide her next move. She walked straight to the reception desk. Megan perked up. "Hi, welcome to Guardian State. I can help you in just a—" "I'm not here for a transaction," the woman said. Her name was Judith Emery, a long-time regional investment client. Megan recognized her, but couldn't place her. Judith stepped toward Elliot and bent down, just enough to speak quietly. "Mr. Dandridge," she said warmly. "I didn't know you'd be here today." He gave her a small smile. "Neither did I." Judith looked up, locking eyes with Megan. "Is that so?" Megan opened her mouth but couldn't get a word out. She stared at Judith like she wanted to ask, "How do you know him?" But nothing came. Judith straightened. "I'll be waiting over there. I was told you'd visit this month. Glad I caught you." She glanced around. "I see you're already making an impact." Elliot chuckled. Unintended, but noted. Judith walked to a chair by the window, pulled out her planner, and started writing. Terence looked from her to Elliot, then back at his phone. He stopped recording. This wasn't a fight anymore. This was a reveal. The air had shifted. Even the customers who didn't fully understand what was happening could feel it. Megan finally walked back to the reception desk, slower now, her steps hesitant. "I didn't know," she said, staring down at the counter. Elliot didn't look at her. "That's the point." She hesitated. "If I had known, would you have treated me differently?" Elliot cut in, his voice still calm. "If I looked the same but wasn't someone important." The question hung in the air like smoke. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the usual sounds of typing and chatter had stopped. Terence glanced at Eduardo, who stood silently across the room. Megan said nothing. Then, click! The hallway door opened. Her last chance to save herself was walking straight toward her. Brian Covington stepped out. Tall, early 50s, built like a retired athlete, his grey-streaked hair neatly combed. His tie was loose, reading glasses dangling from his shirt pocket. He had the kind of presence that sized people up in seconds, and right now his sharp eyes scanned the room. First he looked at Megan. Her shoulders stiffened, but she stayed quiet, waiting. Then his gaze landed on Elliot. Something clicked in Brian's expression. Not panic, but close. "Mr. Dandridge?" he asked, stepping forward, voice low and respectful. Elliot gave a slight nod. "Brian?" That single word made the room feel 10 degrees colder. Brian moved closer, extending his hand. Elliot shook it, firm, steady. "I wasn't told you'd be visiting today," Brian said carefully. "I like surprises," Elliot replied. "They show me the truth." Brian nodded slowly. "Understood." Megan looked between them, confused. "Wait, he's not just from corporate." Brian turned to her, his expression tight. "Megan, we'll talk later." She swallowed hard. "I just didn't." He silenced her with a look. Not loud, not rude, just final. "Mr. Dandridge," Brian said, turning back, "would you like to step into my office?" Elliot motioned to the counter. "I already left a document explaining why I'm here." Brian took the paper from Eduardo, who had quietly handed it over. He scanned it, and his jaw clenched. "Follow me, please." Elliot turned his wheelchair toward the hallway, then paused. "You have cameras here, I assume?" "Yes, sir," Brian answered instantly. 6 angles, all synced to the server. "Good," Elliot said. "I'd like to review this morning's footage before we continue." Brian's face tightened. "Absolutely." Megan stepped forward, her voice cracking. "Mr. Dandridge, I didn't mean anything, I just didn't know." Elliot studied her, not with anger, not with cruelty, just clarity. "You meant exactly what you said," he replied. "That's the problem." Then he wheeled down the hallway, leaving Megan standing there, smaller than she'd been all morning. Judith, still seated by the window, closed her planner and gave Megan a look that could only be described as disappointed. Terence slipped his phone into his pocket. He didn't need the video anymore. The truth was already louder than any recording. In the office, Brian held the door open for Elliot. "Coffee? Water?" "No, thank you." Brian sat behind his desk, opened his laptop, and logged in. "I'll pull up the footage now." Silence, just the hum of the computer. A few keystrokes, and the security feed appeared. Brian rewound to 9:03 a.m. Elliot watched his own entrance, Megan's words, Eduardo's reaction, the crowd's unease. "Send a copy to legal," Elliot said. "Already done," Brian replied without hesitation. Elliot looked at him. Brian met his gaze. "The moment Eduardo brought me that paper, I knew." "I'm not here to fire people, Brian," Elliot said softly. "But I also didn't come to be treated like a nuisance." "I understand." Brian rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking tired. "We've let things slide. Megan's always had a sharp tongue, but her numbers were good. Today was different." Elliot didn't answer. He didn't need to. The footage kept playing, Megan's voice crisp and clear. Outside the office, the lobby stayed quiet. People whispered, but it was the kind of hush that follows a line being crossed. Everyone had seen something they shouldn't have, and no one was pretending anymore. Megan stood frozen at the counter, arms locked across her chest. She kept glancing at the hallway like a kid waiting for detention. The confidence she'd had earlier was gone. Her jaw worked silently, as if chewing on words that could undo what had happened. Terence hovered near the teller booths, fiddling with a paperclip. He wanted to walk away, back to deposits, back to normalcy, but something held him there. Curiosity, or something heavier? He glanced at Eduardo, who hadn't moved. Their eyes met. "Is this really happening?" Terence whispered. Eduardo nodded once. "Every bit of it." Judith stood up, smoothing her skirt. She addressed the room calmly but clearly. "For those wondering, that man isn't just corporate. He owns part of this bank." Heads turned, jaws dropped. Someone muttered, "No way." Judith shrugged. "I've worked with him. Brilliant investor, private, doesn't talk much, but when he does." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Mr. Fairley, a long-time customer, spoke for the first time. So he let her talk to him like that just to see what she'd do? Judith nodded. "That's how he works. He watches before he acts." Megan spun around, half laughing. "This is crazy. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just following protocol." No one responded. Not a word. Megan looked at Terence, maybe hoping for backup. He glanced away. She turned to Eduardo. He didn't flinch. "We both heard what you said, Megan. You know I didn't mean it like that." Her voice rose. "It was just a joke." "Were you laughing?" Eduardo asked calmly. She didn't answer. The hallway door opened again. Brian stepped out first, a folder under his arm. Elliot followed, hands on his wheels, face unreadable. Brian walked straight to Megan. "Come with me, please." "Why? What are you—" She stopped. Something in his tone said this wasn't a discussion. They disappeared into the back. The lobby fell silent again. Elliot scanned the room, some faces embarrassed, some curious, a few ashamed. He wheeled over to Terence. "You were recording earlier," Elliot said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Terence cleared his throat. "Yeah, thought it might help, in case she denied it." "You can delete it." "Sir?" "There's no need," Elliot said. "The lesson's already here." Terence nodded, deleting the clip. "I wasn't sure what to do. She outranks me. I didn't want to get involved." "You did fine," Elliot said. "The hard part isn't speaking up. It's staying calm while the truth shows itself." Across the room, the teenage boy whispered, "He's not what I expected." His mother smiled. "That's the point, baby. People never are." Elliot heard her. He didn't turn, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. In the back office, a very different conversation was unfolding, one that wouldn't leave Megan with many options. Brian shut the door softly. Megan stood frozen, arms crossed, not in confidence now, but as armor. Brian opened the folder slowly. Inside, surveillance stills, her face in every one. "I'll be clear," he said. "This isn't a review, it's documentation." Her voice cracked. "You're not serious." "I'm not playing," Brian replied. "Do you know how many people saw what happened out there?" "I didn't know who he was." Desperation crept in. "If I'd known—" "Stop." His voice was flat. "Do you honestly believe it's okay to speak to anyone that way? You think the problem was not knowing he was an owner?" "I didn't mean it," she muttered. Brian leaned back. "You meant every word. You just didn't mean to be caught." Megan's mouth opened. No sound came out. She looked smaller now, her polish fading. Brian leaned forward, voice low. "Do you understand the position you've put this branch in? That man didn't come to fire anyone. He came to observe. You gave him a show he'll never forget. I can apologize, publicly, to him, to everyone. Do you think an apology rewrites how you treated someone you thought had no power? She looked down. I've had complaints about your tone before. Clients? Staff? I ignored them because your numbers were good. That ends now. Megan's throat tightened. You're really letting me go? Not because he told me to, because I should have done this sooner. She searched his face for mercy. Found none. Your badge and login, now. A pause, too long. Megan. She unclipped her name tag with shaking hands, then typed her deactivation code into the company iPad. When she finished, she looked up. He humiliated me. No, Brian said calmly. You did that to yourself. She took a slow breath, turned, and left without another word. Outside. Elliot sat quietly by the front desk. Judith had returned to her seat. The room stayed hushed, but no one had left. When Megan reappeared, badge gone, coat folded over her arm, the air shifted. Not with cheers or gasps, just quiet recognition. She didn't look at anyone as she walked out, didn't speak, didn't meet a single eye. The door clicked shut behind her. Elliot looked at Brian. All done? Brian nodded. Then I'd like to speak to the team. Brian gathered the staff, 6 employees, even the janitor, in a semicircle near the waiting area. They stood quietly, unsure what to expect. Elliot stayed in his chair just as he had when he entered, but when he spoke, his voice carried like someone who'd been holding it in for years. I didn't come here today to trap anyone, he began. Not to catch someone slipping or to fire a person. That's not my role. No one moved. I visit branches unannounced every few months. I sit, I watch, I ask simple questions, not to test banking skills, but to see how people are treated when they look like they have nothing to offer. Terence lowered his eyes. The loans officer shifted. Eduardo held his breath. Today, I wasn't addressed as a client, not as a man, not even as a human being. I was spoken to like a problem, and the only reason that changed was when Megan realized I had power. The silence was heavy, not uncomfortable, but weighted. I've spent my life being underestimated, dismissed, looked past, and that's fine. I don't need attention. He turned to Terence. But you saw something wasn't right and you pressed record. You didn't fix it. You just acknowledged it. That takes something. Terence looked stunned. Then to Eduardo. You spoke up, not to protect me, but because it was right. That means more than you know. Eduardo nodded, overwhelmed.